Welcome to St. Thomas. As usual, this video is designed as an aid to exploration. Log off the computer, pull up this video on your phone, and go for a walk. Each time I'm done talking about a building, I'll throw up a map to get you to the next one. Pause the video and take a stroll. Indeed, feel free to wander off script for a while. I'll still be there when you get to the next site, and there's always another side street to explore. The first settlement in what is now St. Thomas happened in 1810, and by the 1830s the hamlet had established itself as the principal centre of the Talbot settlement, a still only partially settled territory stretching from Chatham to the Long Point settlement. The extension of settlement inland, however, involved the rise of such cities as Woodstock and London, eroding St. Thomas's importance. The coming of the railways was initially a disaster for St. Thomas. The Great Western Railway, the earliest railway in the area, ran through London, not St. Thomas, in 1853. 3 years later, the London and Port Stanley Railway connected St. Thomas to London and to Lake Erie. But despite great hopes, the railway actually dealt a devastating blow to St. Thomas's merchant community, who saw their customers drained away to shop at larger firms in London. Events took a dramatic turn for the positive, however, in 1871, when not one but two east-west railways were built through St. Thomas, both of them establishing large maintenance facilities in the city. For the duration of the 19th century, the city boomed as a railway centre, with the physical elements of that boom continuing to be evident to this day in the Victorian architecture found throughout the city. Today's walk comes in two parts. First, we'll walk through downtown St. Thomas, which stretches from west to east along Talbot Street, north of the Canada Southern Tracks. Then we'll return west through the wealthy Victorian residential areas, south of the Canada Southern Tracks. The walk starts at the Old English Church, at the intersection of Walnut and Church Streets. One of the oldest churches in Elgin County, the Old English Church was built in 1822, although a cemetery had been in use on the site since 1819. For years the only place of worship in St. Thomas, the structure was the social heart of the village, and served as a gathering place for the local upper crust in addition to its religious functions. Originally a simple Georgian structure, the church has been significantly altered through the years, sprouting a tower and transepts in 1824. The graveyard is well worth wandering through, containing a number of excellent tombstones and serving as the final resting place for most of St. Thomas's early settlers. The Lich Gate, fronting onto Walnut Street, is a relatively recent addition, having been built in 1948 in imitation of Lich Gate's Mr. Maxwell, a wealthy parishioner, had seen in England while serving in the Second World War. Walk 2 blocks east on Walnut Street, then turn north onto Pleasant Street. Stop at the underpass between Centre and Talbot Streets. One of the most important elements in St. Thomas's history was the construction of the Canada Southern Railway, a railway stretching from Amherstburg to Fort Erie and intended to serve American traffic between Michigan and upstate New York. The railway had an electrifying effect upon St. Thomas, establishing it as a major transportation hub and thus as a major economic center in the region. In time, it would spur extensive industry served by the railway, but the Canada Southern and its successors would remain St. Thomas's largest employer well into the 20th century. The earthworks you're standing next to lead to the railway bridge over Kettle Creek, just to your west. The bridge currently standing was the third on the site, erected in 1929. The concrete pillars of the new bridge were erected under the old bridge, and construction was arranged such that traffic never stopped using the bridge during the construction process. With the removal of the tracks on the bridge, plans are currently underway to convert it into an elevated park. Continue north on Pleasant to Talbot, and then turn east. You're walking through the oldest portion of St. Thomas. Indeed, this was St. Thomas's downtown before the city extended to the east in the 19th century. Stop at the intersection of Talbot and Stanley Streets, where Talbot Street jogs a few feet. The southwest corner of Talbot and Stanley was home to St. Thomas's first town hall. Built in 1850 or 1851, the structure was originally the Township Hall for Yarmouth Township, but was taken over by St. Thomas when the village was officially incorporated in 1852. When built, the building served as a courthouse, jail, meeting place for the village council, ballroom, theatre, and market. It was quickly surpassed by larger, more specialized structures as the city grew, and was finally rendered redundant by the construction of the new City Hall in 1899. Immediately to the west of the town hall was the Hutchinson House, built in the 1850s, and St. Thomas's finest hotel for nearly 2 decades. In the early 20th century, the Old Town Hall and the Hutchinson House, would both be demolished to make way for the barns of the St. Thomas Street Rail. The first streetcar service in St. Thomas was in 1879, with service provided by horse-drawn trolleys, which were legally prohibited from traveling faster than a man could walk. St. Thomas, however, was always a small city to support a streetcar network. The system was expanded several times and electrified in 1897, but it was only sporadically profitable and had to be taken over by the city in 1904. The last streetcar ran on December 7, 1925. The industrial building on the southeast corner of Talbot and Stanley was built in 1913, designed by the London architectural firm of Watt and Blackwell for the Wright Shoe Company. Walk 2 blocks east on Talbot Street. The intersecting street is called St. George Street on the north side of Talbot and Queen Street on the south side. Most of downtown St. Thomas was destroyed by a fire which struck on Christmas Day of 1870, the fire bells having been initially mistaken for bells intended to celebrate the holiday. The Victoria Block, later renamed the Free Trade Building, was one of the first new buildings erected after the fire. Designed by George Watson, the building originally housed McAdams Grocers and was extended to the east in 1874. Just to the west, the empty lot on the south side of Talbot was once the home of the Grand Opera House, built in 1873. When built, the Opera House was the leading theatre on the rail lines between Detroit and Buffalo, and hence frequently played host to travelling shows, playing a single night as they passed through town. In 1903, it passed into the hands of legendary theatre magnate Ambrose Small, but fell into decline and was finally demolished in 1970. Continue east another block and a half along Talbot Street. As you go, notice the Masonic Square on the third floor of the McLarty Block, built in 1879. Stop at the Grand Central Apartment Building on the south side of Talbot. The Grand Central Apartments stand on what was once the site of the Grand Central Hotel, a magnificent Second Empire building designed by the Toronto firm of James, Mallory and Mallory. The Grand Central Hotel was erected in 1881 and was at the time and for many years thereafter the largest hotel on the Canada Southern Railway between Detroit and Buffalo. The building was demolished in the mid-1970s. Continue walking east. The next 2 blocks of Talbot Street feature some of the finest Victorian facades in the city, and while I'm going to focus on a handful of buildings of historical interest, keep your eyes wandering for delightful little details. The magnificent building at 390 Talbot is the Southern Loan Building, built in 1901. Stop at the intersection of Talbot and Hinks Streets. On the southwest corner of Talbot and Hinks is the former Anderson department store. The building has changed radically through the years, originally being constructed in the 1870s to house a foundry. In 1902, it was completely reconstructed, and for most of the 20th century was the city's leading department store. Immediately across the street from the Anderson building is the St. Thomas Post Office. The first post office on this site was erected in 1883, with the blueprints coming from the Department of Public Works in Ottawa. A spectacular Romanesque structure, the building was dramatically larger than the previous 1875 post office, built less than a decade earlier, and the new structure served as a symbol of the new city's meteoric growth. The 1883 structure was itself destined to be outgrown, being replaced with the present post office in 1959. Across the street from the post office, on the northeast corner of Talbot and Mary, is the Mickleborough building, built in 1902 and one of the finest works of St. Thomas architect Neil Derrick. The building was built for William Mickleborough's department store. A few doors further east along Talbot Street at 451 Talbot is yet another former department store. The building was built by Neil Derrick in 1894 as the Duncombe Opera House, an elaborate theatre with the remaining space in the building being rented to a variety of well-heeled tenants, most notably the Office of the United States Consul. The ground floor, however, was retrofitted as the home of Woolworth's department store in 1915. The building was completely gutted in a disastrous 1935 fire, but was rebuilt within the surviving walls. Continue east a block and a half along Talbot Street, and look for the stone Roman Catholic Church on the south side. Today's Holy Angels is the third Roman Catholic church on its site, following structures built in 1831 and 1871. By the dawn of the 20th century, a burgeoning congregation necessitated a larger structure again, and Arthur William Holmes, a Toronto architect with close ties to the Catholic Church, was commissioned to design the current church, completed in 1911. When built, The church was surrounded by a convent and Catholic school. The nave is a truly magnificent space, and worth stepping into if you have the opportunity. Across Talbot Street, on the northeast corner of Talbot and Mundaman, is St. Thomas's City Hall, built in 1899 by St. Thomas architect Neil Derrick. By the time the new City Hall was built, the city's old facilities at Talbot and Stanley had become dramatically inadequate. Construction of a new building had been held up for well over a decade, however, by an ongoing argument about the structure's location, with businessmen in both the east and west ends of the city strongly supporting the selection of a site in their area. The rejection of a compromised location in the 1880s led to a worsening of conditions until the city was obligated to purchase land from William at Sardy in the East End. The building is a fine Romanesque structure, which has continued to serve the city to the present day. An extensive renovation in 1989 restored much of the structure's interior to its original appearance. If you're interested in St. Thomas's railway history, you might be interested in leaving the St. Thomas Walk at this point and switching over to the Millersburg Walk, which starts and ends at this location. We'll include a link in the description. Otherwise, or when you're finished with Millersburg, walk south a block on White Street, then west a block on Centre Street. You'll see a large brick church on the southwest corner of Centre and Southwick. The earliest Baptist meetings in St. Thomas occurred in 1837, and by the mid-19th century there were 2 Baptist churches in the city. In 1879, however, the 2 congregations united and constructed a single large brick church, the present structure, designed by Neil Derrick. The congregation remains active to the present day. Walk 3 blocks south on Southwick Street to Wellington Street. You're moving towards the Courthouse district, St. Thomas's wealthiest 19th century district, and as such the houses are going to start getting both larger and more ornate as the walk continues. Wandering down side streets is also likely to become increasingly rewarding if you haven't been doing so already. For the moment, however, look for the large brick church with the purple steeple at the northeast corner of Wellington and Southwick. Trinity Anglican Church, home of the purple steeple people, is the city's oldest religious congregation, tracing its roots to the Anglican congregation, which meant in the Old English Church. With the growth of the city in the mid-19th century, however, the congregation sought a building which would better express the growing social prominence of many of its members. Accordingly, in 1876, the Detroit architectural firm of Lloyd and Pierce was commissioned to design a new church on a monumental scale. If the church is open, step inside. The nave is among the finest interiors in the city. 4 blocks southeast of Trinity Anglican was the former location of Alma College. Once St. Thomas's crown jewel, both socially and architecturally, the college was a private boarding school for girls which attracted students from across the British Empire. A spectacular high Victorian structure, the school was built in 1878, designed by Hamilton architect James Balfour. The institution was intended to fill a gap in the education of upper-class young women in the colony. It was an immediate success, attracting students not only from across Canada, but also in sizable numbers from British colonies in the Caribbean. And in 1888, Balfour was invited back to design McLaughlin Hall, an expansion which nearly doubled the size of the building. The school remained an important institution well into the 20th century, but with the decline of both the British Empire and gender segregation in education, the school came to appear as more and more of an anachronism. It closed in 1989, and after several decades of neglect and a variety of redevelopment proposals, it was destroyed by arson in 2008. Walk west a block along Wellington Street, then a block north along Hinks Street. You're looking for the large brick church on the southeast corner of Hinks and Mitchell. Presbyterianism in St. Thomas dates to 1834, 2 decades after the first settlement in the city, and by the mid-19th century, a large church had been erected on the northeast corner of Talbot and Mary Streets, the site of the current post office. It's interesting to note that a split occurred within the local Presbyterian community about the orthodoxy of the youths of an organ. The St. Thomas Church possessed one of the finest organs in the region at the time, but several of the parishioners objected to it on the basis that organs are nowhere mentioned in the Bible. Several of them, therefore, undertook to walk 2.5 hours to the nearby town of Fingal every Sunday to attend the organless Presbyterian service there. When the 1883 post office was constructed, the Presbyterians used their profits from the sale of the site to hire Gordon Lloyd, a prominent Detroit architect, to design this church for them. The sanctuary is typically closed during the week, but if you have an opportunity to step inside, I heartily recommend taking advantage of it. Return south to Wellington Street, then turn right and keep heading west. On the southeast corner of Wellington and Elgin, you'll see the former Wellington Street Public School, once one of the largest in St. Thomas. If you're interested in a diversion, head south a block and a half to the towered 1892 residence at 86 Elgin Street, built for William Atzardi, an important real estate developer and municipal politician in turn-of-the-century St. Thomas. Otherwise, or when you're finished, carry on to the Courthouse lawn. The first Elgin County Courthouse was erected on this site in 1852. Up until that point, Elgin County had been a part of Middlesex County, with its county seat at London to the north. Extensive settlement in the region, however, had put excessive strains upon the Middlesex County courts, while at the same time concerns had been expressed by the residents of the township along Lake Erie that the distance to London was too far to travel. The architect of the first courthouse was John Turner, a Brantford architect who used precisely the same plans for the courthouses in St. Thomas and Brantford. Both structures, however, had been drastically altered in the interim. On July 1st, 1898, John Turner's courthouse was almost entirely destroyed by fire, which left only the exterior walls standing. A decision was made to retain the elaborately carved stone facade fronting onto Wellington Street, while the architect Neil Derrick was commissioned to design a new structure incorporating that facade. The new building was opened in 1899 and continues to serve as the county courthouse. If court is not in session, see if you can step into the courtroom, a spectacular space with excellent stained glass windows in the dome. The cannons on the courthouse lawn were brought to Canada during the War of 1812, but never actually saw action in that war. The small brick building on the southeast corner of the courthouse lawn is the county's registry office, built in 1874, and expanded significantly in 1910. The registry office was an important institution in the earliest days of settlement, as it was this office which kept track of which land had been granted to particular settlers. At the northwest corner of the courthouse lawn, on the northeast corner of Wellington and Stanley, you'll see a magnificently towered Second Empire residence. One of the most impressive houses in the courthouse district, the McLaughton residence, was built for Archibald McLaughton, a prominent local St. Thomas resident, who owned a bookstore and publishing house, was the first chair of the Public Library Board, and was instrumental in the establishment of Alma College. The building was designed by Edwin Ware and erected in 1878. The walk is over. To return to the old St. Thomas Church, walk a block north on Stanley Street to Walnut Street, and then west a block to Church Street. Alternately, however, you could spend half an hour wandering southeast through the courthouse district.